Welcome to BIB Today, the daily podcast from the newsroom of business in Vancouver. I'm Kirk LaPointe, publisher and editor-in-chief. The extraordinary life of Michael Audain is complex, surprising, and inspiring. It possesses an epic narrative of twists and turns, of the expression of strength and even vulnerability in places, and a drive that would have deterred most anyone by his 85th year. He has at last unleashed a book that dwells much beneath our generally surface understanding of a builder overseeing the construction of 30,000 homes, a collector, an exhibitor, and supporter of fine art, and the extensive philanthropist. It peers into his poverty, into his grueling jobs, into his travels, into his mindset, and ultimately into his soul. The memoir, One Man in His Time, gets its official release on Friday. I'm pouring through it, and I'm delighted we can talk about it today. Good to see you, Michael.
Well, thank you, Kirk.
How does one decide in life that it is at last time to create a memoir?
Well, it took me a long time, but I was used to get quite a few questions about how a left-wing social worker could become a residential developer, and I couldn't really explain it too much myself because it just sort of seemed to happen, and so I thought I would take the chance to look back, and most of my time is really future oriented. I'm planning a lot of projects in the business area and also in the cultural area, particularly to do with the visual arts. But I thought it was time to just take a look back. And of course, when I did it, I realized that I found out a lot of things about myself that I didn't really know.
Yeah, I want to explore those with you because that's what memoirs are also supposed to do. They're not just to explain things to the outside world, they're explain things to yourself. What are some of those takeaways?
Well, I guess I didn't realize that how unhappy I was, what a misfit I was as a child and a teenager, and
Really?
I didn't really realize that, and so but that was the case, and so it took me quite a while to feel that I was somewhere where I could make a contribution, and that actually happened in Vancouver in the early 1960s at UBC, and I owe a lot to the University of British Columbia because that's where I became out of my shell, and I became felt I was starting to achieve something, and also, of course, to my wife at that time. I also owe a lot to Tunya, who I lived with for 10 years.
Yeah. When you discover this about yourself later in life, does it come with regret? What does it come with?
Well, absolutely no regret, but I've been very lucky in my life. I've been very privileged to live in the marvelous place that we do. I love British Columbia. I didn't grow up here as a young child, but I came here when I was just before I was 10, and I love the place. I know the whole of the province from the top to the bottom and east to west, and I also actually have a great affinity for the city of Vancouver, because that's where I experienced a lot of happiness, and that's where, if there's any place I've been able to make a contribution, it's really been in Vancouver, probably, rather than Victoria, where I actually grew up in my teenage years.
You know, we know you in the latter day Michael Audain, all of us, but you talk in this book about a childhood that very clearly your family had at one point this kind of significant advantage, significant wealth, And yet by the time you came along, there wasn't much left.
No,
And
money was a big issue in our family because my parents, my father and my stepmother, were used to living at a much higher income scale than what they could afford in the 1940s and 50s, and so they were always deeply in debt, and that's what I remember. So, but I never felt materially deprived as a child, and but I was just aware that money was a big issue.
yeah, but how did it inform you though about how you thought about uh, the dynamic of wealth and power and influence and all of that? I mean, those are hard lessons early on when you can see your family in some debt.
Well, you write for the business in Vancouver, so, but I can tell you, I did not have the slightest clue about business in the early first half of my life. Really, I had no aspirations in business. I didn't know how to make money. I didn't know how wealth was created. I didn't know very much about economics either, and so. But I guess I tended to identify with the people who were oppressed in one way or another, and I wanted to achieve some things for society in the world, and so that became my interest. I didn't feel that I was part of any elite when I was young in any sense.
Yeah. The cliche, of course, is that the period of life when you are in the left of center is the idealism part, and the part of life when you reach the right side of the political spectrum is the realism part.
Yeah.
Um, how much of that early life, because it was a profound life, a very active life, where you were, very ardently left of center, very activist, how much of that have you been able to carry forward?
Well, that's for other people to judge, really, and not for me. But I agree with you about. Well, Bertrand Russell though said that a true radical grows more radical as he ages. I'm not sure that that's happened to me, but certainly I business, as I mentioned earlier, was something I didn't understand and know any business people. My parents hardly knew any business people, and business was never talked about in our home. So that was very new to me. I started actually to meet my first business people when I worked for the Dave Barrett government for the NDP in the early 1970s, and the premier asked me to get a lot of housing built. And how was I to get housing built? Well, I had to go to see my so-called former enemies, and Jack Poole of Audain and
Yeah.
Elva Narod, and I had to tell them how do we get a lot of housing built, and I found that they weren't such evil people as I perhaps originally thought, and was able to work together, and we did create quite a bit of housing, which at that time made a lot of sense.
Was that the inflection point for you around business?
I think so. I started to meet people in business, and I started to get interested in business in some respects. But it took me. I think Barrett was defeated in late '75. It took me another 5 years before I actually, started up Polygon and got into business. I tried my hand at different things. I got into agricultural investments in the United States. I taught at UBC on a part-time basis for a couple of years. I did research. I did a number of things in that period, but finally I had an invitation to partner with someone and get into business. But in getting into business, I did it, focusing really on building co-op housing and social housing. That was my first focus. It took me a number of years before I ever built any market housing.
I do want to ask you what your best and worst business deals were.
Oh boy, that would be telling stories, and I'm still active in business, so I don't necessarily want to tell the stories. But the toughest experience I had in business was with the Leaky Condo crisis, as it was called, in the late 1990s, and that was a huge shock to us, those who had been building in lower mainland of British Columbia, and how we dealt with that. And it was just a enormous shock to find that we'd built buildings really improperly. We hadn't built them, with the energy code that had been established at that time. We hadn't modified the construction for the climate here and that sort of thing. So we had to find our way through that, and eventually we did. And but that was a real tough period.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you more about that, but the central question I want to know is, how do you think it altered you as a business leader?
Well, I think what it did was it was tough, and I was very upset because Dave Barrett was appointed commissioner to look into leaky condos, and Barrett had been a friend of mine for many years before he became premier, actually, but he and I disagreed on that. He felt it was his job to protect the province and the building code, whereas many of us in the industry felt that the building code was improper and it really contributed to the problem, mm-hmm. and how the code was interpreted by municipalities. So that was a tough period.
Did you lose your friendship with him?
Not entirely. No, I think he made a great contribution to British Columbia, and we a lot of the things we enjoy today in British Columbia can be attributed back to that first NDP government, and so I respect him as his short reign. I think he was one of our real change makers in the province, just like WAC Bennett was.
Yeah. Did you have I'm also fascinated, of course, with the other great facet of their publicness around your collection, your support for fine art. I mean, it's quite a gift that you have, and it's quite a gift you provide. What informed that? Was that something out of childhood? Was it something you adopted in life?
I wasn't creative. I was no good as an artist. I remember, I think it was grade 5, getting 4 out of 10 for my maple leaf because it wasn't realistic enough, and so I didn't.
That's not with you.
I didn't continue a career as an artist, but I couldn't help growing up in Victoria to being exposed to the art of the original people of our coast, the First Nations, and we when I grew up there, we didn't have a public art gallery, and there was no art in our home to speak of. So that's where I experienced art, was with the art made by the people of the Northwest Coast, and so that really got me interested in the visual arts. And then one thing left to another when I had an opportunity later on to visit the great museums of Europe and the Eastern United States. I learned a lot. I never studied art or art history. I never took a course in that, but just having the opportunity to wander around and museums and also actually to start meeting some artists, and that was great, and gradually got me interested in art and really helping artists, because our artists they need a lot of help, particularly in British Columbia. There aren't that as many collectors as perhaps in some other parts of the world, and also artists need good space in which to communicate. You know, they need galleries, they need support, and I think I'm glad they're getting more of it these days. As I go around town, I see a lot more public art, and which enlivens the place, and that's absolutely marvelous.
Do you have a favorite?
I don't have a favorite grandson, so or how can I have a favorite artist or artwork? Okay. No.
I'm wondering whether the early part of your life and the social justice that it informed has translated now into the giving back of the Michael Audain, the philanthropist part of it, and how the two were related.
I suppose so, in the sense that we've done well in our business, but I have never had a interest in building up a dynasty. So my whatever my children have, they've already got, and they're not involved in the business, and so I feel that it's my privilege, actually my duty, to support those causes that I have some knowledge about, some interest in, and so that's kind of what we do, and mostly in the visual arts, but of course we're interested in wildlife in British Columbia, and then we have our own projects that we support fairly anonymously.
There's actual literature around this that suggests that we decide what we want to do at about age 11.
Well,
when did you decide to do what you're doing?
I think at age 11 I wanted to be the Lone Ranger, or
well, there you are. Hold on there.
Cassidy.
Don't go very far on that one, because in that book you're a lone wolf, are you not?
I've never thought of it that way. I've never been called a lone wolf, but no, I was very much into cowboys and Roy Rogers. Anything to do with horses turned me on it.
Yeah.
Age 11. But no, my life, I think I've had, you might call it 5 careers. I've had about at least 8 full-time jobs, and they tend to be rather disconnected, So I don't know what's ahead for me next. I don't have a very good business plan for my life.
Well, but you do describe yourself in the book as a loner at times.
Yes,
I was, probably, didn't it?
I was a loner as a child, that's for sure.
Yeah. So you have no 5-year plan. You have no 10-year plan. But is there a role amid all of these careers, Michael, that you wish you could go back and do it again and do?
No, not at all. I've been very thankful for my life and the opportunities that Lady Luck has afforded me, and it has been luck, often through meeting people that they've offered me an opportunity to do this or that, and that's been marvelous. And the other thing I had to learn when I went into business really was the importance of teamwork, the importance of relationships, and that's at Polygon Homes. That's obviously what we've achieved, and we just have a great team here, and a team who have been together for a great long time, and so that's something I'm very thankful for.
Two more questions, and one of them is to understand, this being a memoir, what kind of daily discipline and dedication you had in order to pull it together. Were you writing pretty much, or editing pretty much, or working with someone pretty much every day or so?
Not at all. It took off and on for 2 or 3 years, and I think I withdrew the book from the publisher, the manuscript, at least once, and I had, because I opened myself up quite a bit for more than what I ever done before in my life. And I think what I write, some of the things I write about are obviously a surprise to my family, but I wasn't very disciplined in writing it, but I had a tremendous encouragement from our publisher, and I hope it came together. I'm working on something else now to do with art, which I feel a little bit more confident about than writing about my own tales.
So you then did set a bit of a personal boundary for yourself on what it is you wanted to discuss and what you felt maybe you ought not to discuss. I mean, most memoirists do that. But
yes,
did you?
One thing about memoirs, you have to recognize they're one-sided, and I didn't have the book vetted by people that I wrote about. I didn't show the manuscript to my family, so it's obviously one-sided, and I think it was perhaps Jean Le Carré who besides all his wonderful spy novels, wrote a memoir, and I think in the introduction to it, I seem to recall that he said memoirs are full of lies because no one tells the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So I'll leave it at that.
Well, okay, but as a writer, I'm going to ask you then, I'm going to ask a fellow writer a question then, because there's not a second that I'm done when I press the send button now where I don't go, oh, I should have put that in.
Yes.
So Mr. Audain, I put you on the spot. Is there something you left out that you now want to put as an addendum here, a little epilogue piece?
Well, I think a little bit about some, as I say, I mentioned tales, stories, because that's what they are, anecdotes, you might call them, and there are one or two that, strangely enough, I just thought about, and I hadn't really thought of before, and I said, yeah, did I actually do that? So much of my life, I feel that I've been really living in a dream. So what am I doing here? I'm in the wrong place. And I remember when I was invited to join the board of the Vancouver Art Gallery, for the whole year, I was afraid to say anything, because what's a home builder doing on a board of a public art gallery? And I thought I was just entirely in the wrong place. And I often, many times in my life, I felt being the outsider. But I guess that's well, it's fine, and I've been kind of used to that. And I'm very charmed that you call me a writer, because I'm not really a writer. I'm just a home builder who's penned a few stories about his early days, mostly his early days.
Well, I mean, 300 pages of early story days. Well, I mean, it's interesting. The most surprising thing I've gotten from this interview is that you somehow harbor this, I don't know, this imposter syndrome or something like that.
In what sense?
Well, that you're surprised that you're where you are. You're surprised that somebody asked you to do this. astounded that you get asked to build houses. You're astounded that you get on an art, or like there. I mean, you've had this string of things that have happened that have been great in your life. Uh, are you able to accept that maybe this is a feeling that doesn't belong with you?
Well, it's strange. Even as a home builder, I sometimes say, what am I doing? I never studied business. I was hopeless with a hammer and nails as a kid, and yet they tell me I've built together with all our colleagues, of course, over 30,000 homes in Greater Vancouver. But that's a surprise, and but a lot of people know a lot more about home building than I do. I can tell you that, and the same thing with art. I feel I'm often just a dilettante, just messing around a little bit with art. But anyway, it's something that I enjoyed, and it's made my life a lot fuller. And I've been very fortunate, and I hope that more and more people come to appreciate the marvelous artists we have living and working in British Columbia, because we really have some of the most important artists, contemporary artists today, and we have this incredible group of artists who, for thousands of years, have been making very sophisticated art, and on this coast, that's our heritage.
Yeah. I could ask you about reconciliation and our indigenous, to the indigenous population of British Columbia, and how that's intersected with what it is that you've supported and all of that. Then let me pop one question in there. What are your aspirations for that reconciliation in our country?
Well, like a lot of people, I'm somewhat. I have a lot of questions. My family's lived here for. I'm fifth generation. My great granddaughter is eighth generation. But we live here on land that was never accorded to us by proper treaty, and yet by people who've lived on this coast for whatever 15,000 years. So, and I was fortunate when I grew up in Victoria, because even though I went to private schools, I was able to meet whole different groups of people who weren't going to private schools, and through my experience in amateur boxing, I was a member of the Victoria City Police Boxing Club for a while as a teenager, and that's where I met and made friends with some First Nations people, and of course I had the interest in the arts. So I find a lot of affinity myself. I'm drawn actually towards particularly the art of the original people of the coast, and I think we have a lot to learn from them. That's really what I think. There's a lot of they can teach us a lot about their view of the world, their relationship, particularly with the creatures that inhabit the land and the sea and the sky that we live in today. And I have a lot of affinity to that, and I also believe that gradually there will be a reconciliation. It's a matter of respect, and certainly I see more and more in our province respect for the people of the coast, and recognition that. How poorly that often they've been treated by us settlers.
Yeah. So you're optimistic it'll get done?
I definitely am. Yes.
Yeah.
I have great friends who in those communities, and you know, as I say, we need to learn so much from each other.
Yeah, I could ask you 100 more questions, but I know we want to be finite on our time. But it's a real privilege to talk to you. Long after we're done, by the way, I'm going to be still shaking my head that you don't understand how you managed to do so well. But whatever, that's for me to worry about. So, Michael Audain, thank you so much for your time today. Good luck with the book. You know, it's yeah, I'm sure your finances are going to be made or broken on the basis of how well it sells. So there you go.
Thank you, Kirk, very much.
Good seeing you. Michael Audain, and I'm Kirk LaPointe, publisher and editor-in-chief of Business in Vancouver. Thanks a lot for watching.